misery loves company. That's what the wise man said.
It's been a while, but I thought I'd better record a follow-up to the whole International Men's Day and Sniggergate video that I did that was surprisingly popular, and was rehosted a bunch of other places and linked a lot, and hopefully contributed to the fact that we did end up with a parliamentary debate on International Men's Day, primarily about male suicide. So yeah, that actually happened. After all that trouble and everything, it actually happened. We got our parliamentary debate for International Men's Day, the same as we've had one for Women's Day since however long it is. I think it's at least a decade, if I remember right. So we got it. But it wasn't all sunshine, roses and unicorns. So there was a debate. It wasn't on the floor of the House. There was other more important stuff going on, which, with Syria and everything, fair enough. Instead, it was held in some back room somewhere. And it was very sparsely attended. I'll link it down there so you can see for yourself, but it's very dry, very long-winded, very procedural, as many parliamentary debates and so on are. So it was pretty lackluster, but you've got to see it as a victory that we had it at all, given the attitude that was presented. And there were some other problems with it as well. I don't think the guy presenting it did the best job that he could have. His own party politics came into it a bit, but this was equally the problem on the other side. The conversation kept being derailed. It kept being pushed off onto other things, or back to women's issues, like those aren't dealt with all the time. And his appeals for men's issues to be taken seriously and so on were kind of dismissed as misogynistic, or a lot of the problems do stem either from feminism or from a feminist outlook. Feminism always seems to set itself up against. I mean, just look at this. Having the debate was opposed by feminists, with a particular brand of feminist, if you want to get like that. But it's the mainstream. It's the main thrust of the movement of the feminist movement at the moment. So I don't think it's entirely unfair to say it's feminism, as long as it's clear that we're talking about the mainstream. So it kept getting derailed, it kept getting pushed onto women's issues. And, well, I'll go into this more in a minute, but some of the people who turned up there weren't there to discuss International Men's Day or the context of anything. They were there solely to talk about male suicide, which is 4 to 5 times higher than it is for women. And I think that's because that statistic is so stark and unbiased. People can't give fake answers, or the data can't be manipulated on suicide because you need a dead body. So the statistics are the statistics, and there's not really that many ways to manipulate it. But it's such a stark, horrifying statistic that it's impossible to ignore. But that was all they were there for. We are here only to discuss male suicide, and nothing else. And so they kept derailing on that basis as well. There was no attempt to understand the context, the reasons why, how all these things fit together. Why might it be that men feel disenfranchised and disposable? Why might that be something that happens, and how does that feed into suicide? No, we just want to talk about this one issue in isolation. And that wasn't very helpful. Now, during International Men's Day, I noticed something, a couple of things interesting during the debate on the hashtag and in the media and everywhere else. We're going to a couple of interesting things. firstly, people were willing, however grudgingly, to admit that male suicide was a problem, but they would only view that in isolation. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, they were only interested in talking about that issue and not any of the contributing issues, the reasons why, like maybe, taking a guy's family away from him has some kind of, depressing or desperate effect on him. Maybe, divorce, ripping him off, and leaving him destitute. Maybe that has some kind of effect. Maybe the high unemployment rates amongst low-skilled men. Maybe the lack of purpose, the lack of money, the lack of ability to provide, and so on. Maybe that's the issue, or at least one of them. Maybe all of these things are an issue. Maybe the fact we spent the last 50 years empowering and redefining what it is to be a woman has empowered them, but the fact that we've spent practically no time whatsoever on allowing men the same kind of capacity to redefine and re-examine themselves and maybe not change anything, maybe change everything. Maybe the fact that we just haven't spent any time on that has meant men lag behind, like they seem to on most things, and that's the problem. The world's changed around us, and we haven't had any time or effort to change with it. Maybe that's part of the problem. Who knows? So yeah, there was a willingness to focus on men, but only on male suicide, and there was a refusal to accept that this was about men. Lots of people were giving this kind of backhanded support where, yeah, it's International Men's Day, woo, trans men, or woo, men of colour, or woo, disabled men, but never just men. There was always this qualifier, this kind of, you had to tick an intersectional box in order to get support. Men who just happen to be men obviously don't deserve any support, don't have any problems. That seems to be the perception. So, sure, we'll support men, but only men who are this or that or the other, not men, which would include all of these groups: trans men, men of colour, disabled men, mentally ill men, suicidal men, homeless men, whatever. No, we're not willing to say men deserve our support. We're only willing to say blah, 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 deserve support. And that was an interesting phenomenon to watch. Another was the willingness to support men, but only via victim blaming men. So we're going to say, oh yes, men have all these terrible problems, but that's because patriarchy hurts men too, or toxic masculinity or hypermasculinity. But the trouble is that what these people call toxic masculinity or hypermasculinity is often simply masculinity, and it's masculinity, or whatever that is, that they want to get rid of. So again, with this qualified support, sure, men need our support to completely demolish whatever it is being a man is. It's not very helpful. In fact, I'd say that's a contributory issue to the problem, in that masculinity itself is only seen in this negative, toxic context. I think any personality trait taken to an extreme is a problem. I think you can look at that issue with women as well. You could say, for example, being emotional can be good. So we regard being emotional and empathetic as a feminine trait, and up to a point, that's a good thing. It allows you to be sensitive to the feelings of others. It allows you to comfort them, to see when they need help, to sense when they need help, and so on. And that's a good thing. But taken to an extreme, it leads to the kind of campus issues that we have now, where free speech is being curtailed, or it leads to crying at an advert for breakfast cereal or something. So that's an example of toxic femininity, which is a positive feminine trait taken to an extreme. Whereas toxic masculinity, you might say that the willingness to self-sacrifice for others, which is seen as a masculine trait, it can be a good thing, because men are willing to support their families and support other men and to support women and to support children and so on. But taken to an extreme, it causes them harm and probably contributes to this sense of suicide because men do not want to be a burden. They do not want to. I'm speaking generally, obviously. We don't want to be a burden. We don't want to worry people. We don't want to upset people. We don't want to take up time and resources and so on that should go to the more deserving. And so suicide, to that male mindset, when it's taken to an extreme, can seem a rational response, a good response, a viable response. But back to the point. The point is that all this support for men was reserved and contingent upon ticking another box or upon being blamed for your own problems. Now, definitionally, a patriarchy that hurts men too is not a patriarchy, because a patriarchy is a society run for and by men. So if it hurts men, then something else is going on, because being a man is not privileging you, it's not giving you anything. So, anyway, yeah, that's that point. It's just interesting to note that any support, not all support, but most support from people was conditional and reserved and only given to subgroups. Particularly interesting and frustrating for me was that this was one of my more popular videos, not necessarily in terms of direct links, but it was mirrored a lot by people. And I've got no problem with that at all. I'm glad lots of people got to see it, and I hope that it helped contribute to the atmosphere that led to us getting this debate, however ineffectual and disappointing that debate was in the end. But it's still disappointing to me, because when I made that video I was very upset and my voice was breaking, and it was a struggle to stay in control, and afterwards I went and had a good cry. But that clearly connected with people, and I don't like that. I like logical and rational arguments and facts to carry the day, and I don't like emotion to carry the day, and I don't like anecdote to carry the day. So, because actually, anecdotes are not data, yeah? And however upset someone gets about something, that doesn't make it true. So I hate the fact that me having a slight breakdown and using anecdote and talking about myself had such a profound effect and connected with so many people, because that's not what makes for a good argument. That's not what makes for a good justification for action. That's the kind of emotional overreaction that leads to something must be done. But there's no denying the effectiveness. It just doesn't sit right with me. I don't like it. Yeah, but the 1 in 4 suicide statistic, sorry, four times the amount suicide statistic, that is both factually true and has an emotional impact, because it's just horrifying when you think about it, especially when you think about, well, this may be related, that less men report feeling depressed or suicidal than women do, and women apparently make more attempts, but men are more successful because we choose more ruthless methods, and maybe it's that we actually intend to kill ourselves, whereas people talk about suicide attempts being a cry for help, and sometimes it can be. Maybe it's more of a communication method for one gender than the other. I'd need to see some studies or something. But like I say, the rational argument should be the thing that carries the day when we talk about statistics. It shouldn't be. Statistics lie, so you need to find good, solid, reasonable statistics, and this is why we debunk them. And maybe it's a good thing to have stories and anecdotes and emotion alongside that data to help convey it and get it to people. But for an emotional argument itself to be considered sufficient is a problem for me. I mean, you can compare to the supposed 1 in 4, 5, 6, 7 rape statistic, which has been debunked many times, but that has an emotional impact similar to the suicide statistics, the 4 times suicide statistic. People are horrified by this, but in that case it's not true. So you should, but if you then criticize or examine or debunk that statistic, you're not actually engaging in a statistical, scientific, factual argument, because people will take it emotionally. They will say that you're being a misogynist or a rape apologist if you just simply don't buy those statistics. So there's a case where that becomes an emotional argument, even though on the face of it it's about stats. People lack objectivity, they lack distance, and this is something I criticize a lot. So when something I make is this big success on the basis of emotion, I just really don't like it, and I'm asking you to understand that, and I'm appealing to you to just be mindful that emotional arguments aren't good arguments and are often manipulative, and that even when you think you're in an objective discussion of statistics, you might actually be in an emotional argument. One last thing I want to cover in this video, and that is the whole MRA thing. Now, I don't particularly, especially regard myself as being an MRA, but I get called it a lot. And this is a whole muddy, messy area of semantics. Now, I used to consider myself a feminist when I considered feminism to mean equality and fairness based on gender. And I stopped considering myself a feminist when it became apparent that this was not what feminism was. And I've always been an egalitarian, but I regarded feminist as being something within that. And my objections to feminism also fuel some of my objections to being labelled an MRA. I still regard myself as an egalitarian, but I think it's my opinion that men's issues don't get highlighted as much, don't get discussed as much. There's less action on them, they need more support, at least in the West. I think globally, Africa, Islamic countries and so on, women's rights need the focus very much. But here in the West, I think men's issues have been completely cast aside, or nearly completely cast aside, and not dealt with. And what it is to be a man has not been examined. Men's role in society hasn't changed. Women have lost a lot of their obligations in society, but have retained a lot of their privileges in the proper sense of the word, while men have lost a lot of their privileges but have not lost a lot of their duties. So where there was maybe some sort of balance between the two, there isn't now. So men's privileges, again in the proper sense of the word, came with obligations previously, whereas now the obligations are retained but the privileges largely aren't. Whereas on the women's side, privileges have been gained but reciprocal obligations have not been imposed. But I don't regard myself necessarily as an MRA, because I regard myself primarily as an egalitarian, which means I want equality for everyone. And despite the wage gap being stupid, despite rape numbers being overblown, there are issues about defending women's rights to abortion. There are, even in places like Ireland, and there's other issues that are genuine. I just happen to think that the balance is more that men need attention in Western society now. I think men and boys are in a huge crisis. So I'm only an MRA in the extent that I believe in equal rights and opportunities for everyone, and that includes men. So call me an MRA if you want. It's not really a big issue to me, but I do not align myself with people like A Voice for Men. there are good people within that organisation, but I do not like the trollish and bombastic way in which they go about things, and we don't agree on everything. And there's a lot of understandably bitter men involved who identify as MRAs, just as there are a lot of understandably bitter and angry and horrible women in feminism. This is part of my problem. I think that the two mirror each other. So while I have an interest and focus on men's rights and issues, I don't identify with what MRA means, sometimes unfairly. So it's just a personal thing for me. But just the whole one of us thing was just a bit much. And this wasn't what they call a red pill moment. I was already well aware of a lot of these issues, circumcision, education, sentencing, mental health care in particular. Obviously, that's something particular to me. And I already knew about all this, so it wasn't like a sudden revelatory moment. It's just the International Men's Day and the debate thing just really brought home to me how entrenched the opposition to even examining men's problems is, and how society, not individuals, but society doesn't really care, because the narrative is still that women are the oppressed minority with all the problems, and the very idea that men could have an issue was so between Jess Phillips's giggling, sniggering, and between the hostility and the reservation and the weaseling on International Men's Day, that just has brought home to me just how bad the problem is. But it wasn't a red pill moment for me. This wasn't like the scales falling from my eyes, because despite all the claims of me being a misogynist and whatever else whatever else gets flung at me, I love women. I really do. I would generally rather spend my time around women. They're nice to look at. They smell nice. They're more sensitive towards your emotions and so on. Speaking stereotypically, I like women. My mum's a woman. My wife's a woman. My millions of lovers are women. Okay, I'm being flip, which is a very, very male thing, I guess, when you're talking about something emotional. But I don't hate women, and that's what a misogynist is. I love women. It's just I don't. It's ideologies I don't like. So if I say I'm against feminism, with the caveat that the same thing we talked about earlier, here we're talking about mainstream, I guess you'd call it media/Tumblr feminism. If I'm against that, that doesn't mean I'm against women any more than being against Islam means you're against Muslims, or being against National Socialism means that you're against Germans. It doesn't work like that. It's the divide between an ideology or an idea or a meme and a person. These are two different things. So I don't buy into the MGTOW philosophy that women are just in it to use you or whatever. Resource leeches, gold diggers, whatever. I don't buy into any of that bollocks. I think feminism is in its modern incarnation is shit, but that doesn't mean I hate women. This wasn't a red pill moment for me. I don't think women hate men. I don't think they are detrimental to men. I don't consider them parasites. I would not want to spend my life without being around women. No, just don't put that on me, please. I get enough of that from people who don't listen to what I actually say or think, calling me a misogynist or whatever, just because I like boobs. I don't need it from people who want me to be on their side or who consider me on their side. Don't label me. Just let me be me and do my own thing. And where we agree, that's great. Where we disagree, that's also great, actually. Disagreement's fantastic. So yeah, I've been rambling enough. I'll draw this to a close here, but that's just, I wanted to pause and reflect. Peace out.